I'm actually running the communications for a project to which MedWet is participating that is called Wetland-based Solutions. And I will tell you a few words about this in a minute. And I'm hosting this webinar together with two amazing experts, Elisabetta Tola. Elisabetta will introduce herself and her colleague, Julia. So we are very pleased to have you with us today. I could see from the information you shared as you were registering that it seems that the topic, let's say, of wetlands when it comes to talking about climate change is not something that you've either covered or you're familiar with. And nevertheless, in the Mediterranean, it's extremely important. As I said, I work for a project that is called Wetland-based Solutions. And like you, before I started, I had no idea about not only these habitats, but how they are importantly contributing to the climate and the biodiversity. I mean, the solutions to the climate and the biodiversity crisis that we have in the region. There are a number of places in the region where we know that the sea level is going to rise dramatically, and this is going to happen in some places already within the next 50 years. And this is going to have really lots of impacts, not only on nature, but also on people, on economies. I'm pretty sure that you know as well as me that the Mediterranean is the first tourist destination in the world. It's also a huge production area for agriculture. And unfortunately, the habitats that we see on the coasts are being destroyed to always build more, to always be closer to the sea. And it's a pity because there are ways that we could really make sure that nature and people work together. And this is what we're going to talk about today, looking at how we can communicate or talk about the coastal wetlands and the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So I don't want to tell more. I'm going to give the floor to Elisabetta and Julia, and I will come back for the closing remarks. So thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much, Chantal, for this very nice introduction and for hosting this great event. I'm very happy to be here with Elisabetta and you, and of course to meet all of you. Thank you very much for finding the time to join us. It's really a pleasure to meet you all. So I'll hand over to Eli in just a minute to start and deep into the program. But before, as we don't have time to have a whole presentation, we would like to propose you a very nice, just an overview at the beginning in an old-fashioned way, I would say. So I would encourage you to have a piece of paper, if you have around you, and a pen, and write your name, your country, and your role, which can be journalist, communicator, and so on. So if those who don't have the camera can switch on just for a second, otherwise they can write in the chat. So we just have, you know, an overview, a visual introduction, let's say. Okay. So I hope you can see. Nice, I see Ibihel. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Hi, welcome, Sasha. Julia. And we have also someone answering the chat, so thanks. I'm trying to do a screenshot of this.
I'm trying to get a screenshot.
Me too, yeah.
Oh, Okay, so in the chat we have Chris from Lebanon and Monica from Italy, and both are journalists. Chris is a photojournalist.
Great. So thank you, everyone, and I hope we get to know each other a bit better during this workshop. We will try to make it as much interactive as possible, especially in the second part, but of course, feel free to interrupt us and ask anything also during the presentation. So now I'll leave the virtual floor to Eli for the first part, which is how to cover climate crisis with data.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Chantal, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely pleased to be here with you today. I hope you can hear me well, and yeah, that's fine. Okay, so my first part here will be around 40 minutes, more or less. I have the challenge, first of all, to make sure that you don't fall asleep immediately after lunch and then while we're trying to enter this activity. I want to share with you, and I'll go and share the screen immediately. Just a second. And okay, and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So my challenge here is really that of sharing with you some experiences and some methodologies of how to cover the climate crisis and the climate crisis in a very broad sense, of course, the ecological crisis as well, through the use of data and innovative journalistic approach. So this is my name. FACTA is the organization I have founded a couple of years ago together with Julia and other colleagues, and I will tell you more in a moment. And that's my Twitter handle. Okay, so who am I? I'm a science journalist. I used to be a researcher before then. I am, as a journalist, I'm working for the National Public Radio here in Italy. I'm a presenter at Radio 3, and I'm also a managing editor at Il Live. Il Live is a magazine published by the University of Padova. It's an independent cultural digital magazine. I also founded many years ago at this point a science communication agency called Formica Blue. We do a lot of communication with that. But recently, as I said, with Julia and other people, we founded FACTA, which is an independent center for journalism and for the application of scientific methodology to journalism with a strong focus on the Mediterranean area. I will leave, of course, the presentation after this. So there are a few more things about me and the things that I've been writing and working on in the past few years. So FACTA, you can see the website. It's, as I said, a small organization. We're really very young because we started our operation in 2019. And of course, this was just before the COVID pandemic hit. So it's been a little bit difficult to do a lot of different projects. But the focus of our work is really that of applying the scientific method to science journalism, to the making of journalism. So we try to be as rigorous as possible in stating the hypotheses we are working on, and then of course in collecting data and collecting the scientific literature as sources of our investigations. But that's not enough, of course. We do a lot of field reporting as well. So we try to combine field report with data and scientific literature to have all of these validated by experts, and then finally to produce a piece of innovative journalism to be published, whether it's a text or it's a data visualization, it's a podcast or something else. So as I said, I try to combine different approaches to journalism. You can see me at the radio. One of these pictures is actually very old because it comes from, which is this one on the left, comes from my original experiences at a local radio station in Bologna, where I'm speaking from. But also we do a lot of field reporting. And this is a picture of myself and my colleague, Marco Boscolo, in near Tehran in Iran, when we were doing some work on agrobiodiversity. Of course, when you do, and this is one of the reportage we did, when you do a lot of coverage on the field, you collect lots of stories. And I think this is common to many journalists. Of course, I'm pretty sure it's common to many journalists in the room. This is a very it's an ongoing investigation that we have started many years ago on the use of biodiversity in agricultural production as an alternative means to food production compared with the industrial approach. So basically we're being investigating if a biodiverse agriculture can prove to be successful both in providing enough food for people and at the same time to have a lower impact on the environment, on the planet. And this investigation was then organized in many different outputs. The first one is a website that you can see here, seedversity.org, but then we produced also podcasts, visualization, and finally even a book recently. To do this kind of work, we went around a lot. So we went to Iran, France, Senegal, Ethiopia, South Africa, collected lots of stories. And the only reason why I'm sharing these pictures is to go with you in the same on the same lines of how we do journalism normally, which is of course going on the field and collecting stories and talking with people and seeing how people are dealing with the local issues and problems, how they're dealing with, for example, in this case, the scarcity of water, the needs to find productive seeds, and so on and so forth. So of course we traveled in many different places, collecting lots of stories that were recorded in video. And actually, we went to some countries in the south of the world, but we also went to see how farmers are trying to approach in an innovative way agricultural production, also in my country, in Italy, in France, in Spain, and even, which seems very far from this kind of topic, even in New York. New York is today one of the cities with the highest number of roof gardens, and they're producing a lot of food production using organic agriculture made on the roofs in the city. So it's a very interesting experience also to see how a city, which we usually refer to the most urban type of environment we could think of, it's actually trying it's hosting, let's say, a number of experiences that are trying to experiment with agriculture in a very innovative way. So stories are one part of the work we do, and the work you can do when you're trying to tell a story about a complex issue, as the one can be food production or the impact of climate on food production, the impact of climate on a certain type of environment, and so on and so forth. Another way is to use data and numbers, of course. So it's a way that I've been experimenting a lot, trying to find the numbers that can better represent the extent of the problem. For example, when we're discussing about food production. So one number which is extremely important, it's almost the question we start from, can be, we will be 9 billion people and we will need to feed 9 billion people in a few years' time. So that's a huge challenge that humanity is facing, of course. Now, we know, and this is a number that comes from the FAO investigations and reports, that more than 70% of the food produced on the planet is produced by small farmers, not by big farmers, not a big industrial plants, but by small farmers, and who basically use only 25% of the soil. And these two numbers tell a story on their own, because we could, of course, collect a lot of experiences, and we could put all the experiences in a row, like the one we have been collecting, all the countries I was showing before. But simply by stating these two numbers, we can already give a very strong perspective to our readers or listeners, telling them, you know what, the people who are producing most part of the food today on the planet are actually small farmers using a small percentage of the total of the agricultural land that's been exploited today. And this is already telling us a lot about the impact of small agriculture compared to industrial agriculture. Again, another example, we can use one number that was produced by the IPCC 2.5 years ago in a special report on land use. IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, came to measure they analyzed tons and tons of scientific reports, and they finally came up with a number of impacts that different sectors of agriculture, different sectors of production have on emissions. Agriculture is contributing to the global count of emissions with 23%. So basically 1/4 of the emissions on the planet are due to agriculture. That's another important number that we need to use when we are talking about the possibility, the choices we face, for example, in trying to produce food in a more sustainable way. And again, another number, 10 companies all over the world are the one owning the 75% of the market of seeds. So for any farmers on this planet, basically, the choice of which seed to plant and to produce is very limited by the fact that the market is highly controlled by only 10 companies. So this is just an introductory part, just to tell you that you can tell a lot of stories starting from the stories. And this is extremely important. And I think actually with Julia, we will go back to this point later, because again, stories are obviously the focus of journalism. And we need to be sure that we always also bring some personal or local stories to the reportage and to the reporting activity we do. But on the other side, using data is actually giving the context and placing any story in a context that's easily understandable by many people, immediately framing the extent of the problem we're facing. And this is extremely important, particularly when we're dealing with complex issues. So I've tried to summarize in this slide the key ingredients when we are doing some reporting on the climate and ecological crisis. The picture is a Jackson Pollock studio, and I am particularly fond of Jackson Pollock because many people try to do something similar to Jackson Pollock. And it's been studied over and over again, even in a scientific way, because it's basically extremely difficult to reproduce exactly Pollock artistic creation. And that's because it's an amazing combination of complexity and of course also of emotional and artistic approach. But when we're doing this in reporting, we have to make sure that we try to face complexity by putting all the other ingredients in our reporting. So the context is extremely important, and the data are extremely important. The science, of course, it's extremely important, but we also need to provide our readers and our listeners or viewers with a lot more, like, for example, a political context or the historical context. And as we are seeing in the latest years, a new brand of journalism coming up with a solution, because focusing only on the problems is really somehow putting our listeners or readers or viewers in a situation where they feel absolutely without any possibility to act on a problem. I know Julia will go much more on this solution approach later, so I don't want to spoil that, but it's just to say that when we're looking at the way journalism is being trying in the last few years to improve the coverage of complex issues, using the data is one thing, and trying to give a solution is also another key ingredient. So it's very important to keep all of these ingredients together. I always like to say that we also need to have a little bit of knowledge of how our mind, our brain works when we're dealing with complexity and with issues that have to do with uncertainty. And when we're looking about any sort of ecological crisis. I mean, today we're talking more about the wetland type of environment, but this is really true for any type of environmental reporting. We need to know how people react to data, to facts, to information, because we very often think that it's enough to give enough data or enough exact facts to get people to act. but people do not act only and they don't take decision only based on facts and data. And so it's very important also to know a little bit more of how we react to things and how we react to scientific information in order to shape our reporting and shape our communication in a way that can be really enabling people to react and act. And I like to always quote Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist from Israel, but he won the Nobel Prize for economics. And many economists were very, very annoyed by this because, of course, he's not an economist. But the thing is that Daniel Kahneman is one of the scientists who basically has done one of the preliminary work on showing how our brain takes decision in front of uncertainty and when facing uncertainty and complexity. And it's extremely interesting to see that there is a very interesting combination of our usage of expertise, data, facts, scientific information, but also all of that goes around. So our knowledge, our philosophy of life, our political views, and so on and so forth. I just want to close this introduction and then I will go straight into the data and how we work with data by mentioning what's happening in the last couple of years in the journalistic field when we refer to the environmental issues and covering environmental issues in a complex and truthful way. It's very interesting and actually it's being very highly controversial. I would be also interesting to know your takes on this and your reaction. But a couple of years ago, The Guardian, the British newspaper, started a sort of a campaign. They call it the Climate Pledge. They started a campaign on trying to launch a new way to do environmental reporting and particularly to talk about the climate challenge. And I just want to show you if we can connect here. Let's see. Okay. Can you still see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So basically, The Guardian decided to start changing the language. They don't call climate change anymore. They call it climate crisis. They decided to give a lot of indications of how to use images, of how to shape the reporting to make sure that there isn't so much sensationalism or looking at the climate effect only far from where we are, but giving very specific indication of how to make climate reporting more effective by, for example, using a more appropriate language, a more truthful language, but also by looking at the effects and impacts of climate everywhere around us and not only considering, for example, talking about the polar bear and the ice melting on the poles, but being very, very careful and very interested in documenting what's happening around everyone's place. And this is extremely interesting. It's being highly controversial because usually we don't look at journalism as being taking a side or becoming a sort of an activist player, but they decided to do that because they say that this topic, the challenge of trying to slow the climate crisis and trying to improve the environmental situation on the planet is such a huge challenge that we cannot at this point accept to be how can I say, too balanced. We have to be much more embracing this challenge and to make sure that we report on this in a useful way, not only in a truthful way, but also in a useful way. So I think it's an extremely interesting type of discussion. Okay, so if I can focus, Julia, you tell me the time, because I'm checking also the clock, but I might be carried away, you know. So I want to focus a little bit on the methodology because this is really the frame where we are working, and our proposal is, of course, that of having this complexity in mind and making sure that we never try to be too focused on concentrated on a little issue. We try to cover issue by issue within a complex sort of framework. What can we do by using data? So data journalism is not really a new practice at this point. It's been tested and used in journalism for over a decade. And in fact, it's been launched many years before. Let's say the the big brother of data journalism is called precision journalism, and it was launched by this guy, Philip Meyer. He's an American journalist. He was working in Detroit in the 60s during social riots that happened to take place in the city of Detroit. He was the first journalist to think of using the computer. At that time, it was a big computer, like one room, you know, one of those computers that were used in the 60s in a university, to use the computer to improve his coverage. So basically, he collected tons of data about the riots that were taking place in Detroit. He did a survey, collected over 300 answers by the people of the city, trying to understand the reasons behind these riots and the social situations in the city. And then he analyzed all of this data through the computer. So he basically is the first person who used a quantitative method in journalism. Of course, the computer in the 60s and 70s were not personal computers. So this type of approach was really very difficult, and you needed a lot of resource to do it. While now we are in a much easier situation, and in the last 10, 12 years, the combination of having access to data, a lot of data online, we will go into that in a moment, having access to tools that allow us to work with data on our personal computer, makes data journalism really a practice that everybody can basically apply. This is a very synthetic representation of the methodology behind data journalism. So data journalism starts with data, of course, and this is really obvious. But the thing is that data can be coming to you in two ways. You can find data, for example, at this point, we will see an example in a moment. You might find a lot of data even just by looking at the website of the international organization. I mentioned the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, for example. They have a huge data warehouse. The OECD, the World Bank, the European Union, lots of universities. So many institutions host big databases, and finding the data is not so much a problem anymore, because lots of this data is actually open. So you can go into this website, look for the data you want, download it, and use it. There are other ways data come to you. They can come through scientific publications. So you could, for example, see the data that's being used by scientists or yielded by scientists, like when they measure a certain environmental issue. For example, scientists sampling the quality of water or the quality of air, and then compiling this data year after year and then publishing it. So that's also a piece of data we can use in our reporting. Or there is a third way, which is the data that you can get from people who are working on the field. For example, NGOs or social organizations, very often they are producers of data. So they're data producers in the sense that they are the one trying to measure some sort of a problem and trying to find a way to actually collect this data and make it available. The data needs to be filtered and cleaned, and there are lots of methods here as well. I will give you a lot of resources in a moment about that. And then data journalism is typically done by visualizing the data, making sure that the data is given back to your viewer or reader or listener through graphics or through maps. So in a way that is visual, and that's really powerful way to convey the sense of that data and the meaning of that data. Of course, if we only do a graphic and we only do a map, we don't have a story there. So journalism is story-based, and we know that. So we cannot simply take the data as in a report and put it online or put it on a page. We need to use that data in a context, as I said before, and make sure that we build a story around that data. Basically, it's actually quite simple what we can do with data. We can compare data in time, make sure to see, for example, how a certain parameter is evolving through time. We could see, I don't know, the temperature typically. Now, when we're talking about the climate crisis, we're looking at how temperatures are changing in time, or how emissions are changing in time, okay? And then we can compare data in space. I could see how the quality of air is sampled in Italy compared to France or Tunisia or Morocco or Spain, and so on and so forth. And we can find patterns because data can tell us, for example, if there is a certain pattern of water availability, or on the contrary of drought, or if there is a certain pattern, for example, of combination between drought and certain cultivations being more or less capable of surviving. So I can either look at things in a chronological way or in a spatial way, or trying to understand a certain type of phenomena. Okay, sorry, I think this, okay. Yeah, so this is the first step. The first step is we collect the data, and the data can be, as I said, coming from many different sources. And the data is organized, we will see it in a minute, but it's organized in a table typically. So we have basically this data organized in tables that we can use. At this point, every single computer has at least one software that is capable of analyzing the data in a table format. And then, so we collect the data and organize that in a spreadsheet. And then we do calculation on the data. For example, we want to do comparison. We want to calculate rates, percentages, and so on. And then we have our output, which is a story, it's a visualization, it's a table, and so on. So the first step, I just have two examples here. I don't want to go too much into this detail, but just to show you. The finding the data step, even if you just want to start, even if you just want to try, for example, it's pretty easy to enter the FAO data warehouse. So years ago, they were not well organized, but they are much more organized now. For example, you can go here and explore the data. And as a matter of fact, the thing is that these organizations at this point are giving us the data in terms of tables that we can download, but they're also giving us already visualizations, so graphics or maps where we can see the data. But just to show you, for example, production, I might want to go and see the crops and livestock products, and then here I can take down all the data directly. These are big bulk of data, okay? Even as you see, separated by continent or all data, or I can choose the type of data I want to see. I don't know, Argentina, and compare Argentina with, Belgium is a bit small, Brazil, okay? And then I want to see, for example, the quantity of certain crops that are produced. I'll take only the 2020 and 2015. I can pick the time I want, and then go and see just a comparison for, I don't know, avocados, okay? Maybe this is not that significant, it's just to show you, okay? And here I have my table already organized, properly organized, and I can download the table. So simply by clicking here, I will get the table, which is in a format that is useful and usable, like an Excel format or a table in a very simple way. So of course, this is one way. I just wanted to do something extremely simple to show you, but you can also take down huge amount of data. My suggestion for the people who have never done that is to start with something very simple if you want to try out, because starting with big bulk of data is always very, very complicated. Okay, let me go back here. Another example, this is the European Environment Agency. This is actually quite a new website and data warehouse, but again, you can go inside here, for example, and there are a lot of different data products here. Just to show you also a map case, you can see here, for example, birds and habitats, and you can see a lot of maps that are already produced, but you can also go and get the data directly in table, okay? you need a little bit of time to go and look for things, but I think it's extremely it's also very enjoyable to go and explore data and trying to find the data you want to use. Okay. Now, the data then is imported in a tool, which is a data sheet, of course. So if you use Excel, you have Excel. You can use the Google data sheet. That's part of the Google Drive. If you use Google Drive, you have that for free already. You can use, of course, the open source softwares like OpenOffice or LibreOffice. So the data is imported in a table format. And usually when we say clean the data, we mean that we need to have tables that are properly organized in order to use the next bit of software, which is the visualization software. And you want to make sure that you don't have, for example, double names or spelling mistakes and all of these things. So you go with a clean table. And once you have the table, you can go and visualize the table. I want to show you just one software. There are tons of them. Again, in my presentation, you will have a lot of also more specific tutorial, because of course here we don't have the time to go step by step together, but you need to maybe try out and do it directly in a proper way. So here it is. Okay, this is one software I want to show you, which is called Data Wrapper. It's a German software, and there is a free version of it, so you can use it to start trying out your visualization. I've tried this before just to show you how you do it. You start a new graph, you copy and paste your data inside here. It's very, very easy. So you just simply copy and paste the data here, and then you go ahead and you can see the table as the software shows that. And then you can go and choose the type of graph that you want to use. I don't know, this one, or you might want to do the one which is a linear one, or lines and so on. You can try the different type of graphs, the one that better fits your needs, of course. And then you go ahead and step by step you complete your graph, and then you can basically use this graph, publishing it directly either as an image or as a piece of code. You can put it on your web page. So it's extremely quick and fast. So without going too much into the detail of the technical issue, but I want to give you a couple of warning on this. And then, as I said, I will leave you with all the links to actually learn how to use this tool in case you are curious to try. When we use data, we need to be extremely careful. Journalists tend to be really bad with data because we tend to immediately jump to the conclusion. While analyzing data, you need to be very sure that you don't take assumptions that are wrong. So, for example, making wrong correlation. You see certain data and then you see other type of data, and you immediately try to find, to couple these kind of facts and data and say, oh, that's an explanation for that. It's much more complex than that. And in this sense, it's extremely important and useful to talk with scientists and get them to help you also to try and find explanation for the data you have in your hand. As I said before, it's extremely important to put always context around your data. And it's also extremely important to know how that data was collected. I'm pretty sure that many of you might have had that kind of experience. If you find yourself in front of a table, but you don't know how that kind of data is being collected, it's very difficult to give any sort of interpretation. So it's extremely important to be very, very precise in that. This is an example of a wrong correlation, of course. There is an ex-American student that found very amusing the idea of making wrong correlation with the real data. So he was putting real data together and showing if you would tweak just the scale of what you're showing, you can really basically put phenomena that have nothing to do in the same table and come up with the most curious and spurious type of correlation. So be very, very careful not to do the same mistake, of course. When working on the data visualization part, there are today a lot of tools and a lot of indication to make sure that we visualize data in a proper way and to make sure that we don't use graph or maps that are not correct for the type of data we have in our hands. Okay, these are the list of tools. I'm not going one by one. I'm leaving the tools with you so you can go and check. Most of them actually have also a free plan, so you can use it to make sure that you can start and have some experience. And again, these are some resources. One very important thing, and I think Giulia will go back on this point, is that in the last few years, a lot of experiences have been coming up showing the power of people working in different countries in a joint way and doing cross-border investigation, particularly when we're talking about environment. This is obviously due to the fact that environmental problems do not stick within a certain type of border, right? They don't start in a country and stay there, but they are actually always by nature cross-border problems. So even solutions can be cross-border solution. I don't know if then later with Julia and Chantal we will go back to this point, but see, when we approach environment, we approach something that has no borders. So lots of investigation in the last few years have been using the same approach, putting people working together from different countries with the same focus. And there are a number of experiences that are extremely interesting. I want just to show you one, which is that Sensor Africa. Sensor Africa was funded by Code for Africa, which is extremely interesting and innovative group of journalists working in different African countries. Their basis is in Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Tanzania, and many more. And they do a lot of work with data, with technological tools applied to journalism. So in this case, for example, they were using sensors, so little piece of technology to make sure that they could couple journalistic work with social work, with people in certain environments or in certain neighborhoods to measure, for example, the quality of the air, the quality of the water, or the sound pollution or radiation pollution. Okay, so I'll just show you, for example, here you can see a lot of articles that came out, and they came out by joining forces and making sure that they were basically measuring the quality of air in different cities. I don't know if we see Nairobi, for example, and we can see the data that it's being collected in Nairobi, and it's shown in this sort of a counter, and then you can go to Lagos in Nigeria and see a different type of data and so on. So it's a very interesting way to show the data, and then after the data also see the stories that have been built in the area. Okay, Giulia, do I have still a few minutes or not?
Yes, perfectly on time.
Okay, so there are lots of examples and case studies where we can see complex type of investigation. I just want to show you two, if I can. There are many that I'm going to leave with you so you can have a look, but there are some of them that I would like to show you, and let me see. Okay, so this one, it's an extremely interesting one. It's a Reuters story, and it's extremely interesting in terms of the visualization they have been doing. This is a high quality type of visualization, is to show to people and make sure people understand the amount of pollution we get from using plastic bottles. So you can see that there is a counter here that basically is based on the rate of sale of plastic bottles in the world. So you see that by the time you are here, you see how many bottles are being sold in the time this page is being open, okay? Just to give you an example. And then it's very nice how they actually try to make comparison with well-known monuments to make sure people would understand the extent of the problem. For example, every hour, almost 55 million bottles are sold, which is a pile as high as the Christ in Rio de Janeiro, or every day it's a pile as high or almost as high as the Eiffel Tower, okay, or half the size. Or in 1 month, it's basically, look at here, the Eiffel Tower is basically submerged by the amount of bottles. And in a full year, we have something compared to the Burj Khalifa, the skyscraper in Dubai, or in like a mountain of bottles that is the size, for example, of compared to the size of Manhattan. So these type of visualization are extremely effective in giving in one snapshot the extent of the problem. Of course, I don't have the exact numbers of bottles here. So this is not an analytic type of visualization, but it's a very powerful one to show to our reader immediately how big is the problem with the pollution coming from plastic. Sorry. Another example here that I would like to show, let me just go, oh, sorry, here. Oh no, this is, let's see. Okay, so this is, for example, a piece by El País, Planeta Futuro. It's one publication by El País. Again, it's a sort of it's called like a web doc. And you see here different type of environmental problems shared by fishing communities in different countries. Okay, so you can see the story in Mongolia, Madagascar, and you have a combined album. So you can compare the problems in two different places using, again, data and images and a multimedia approach with a lot of nice images and multimedia production. And so there are many, many more examples here. I think that I want to close with this, maybe if we can see that. Yeah, this is an old piece, but I always like to show it because it's extremely strong. And this is a data visualization and a publication showing the stories of the defenders, the people who have been killed in different countries because they were trying to defend, to protect the environment. So you see a lot of personal stories of each one of them. And this is the list of all of them. The people who died in 1 year, we're talking only 2017 here, so all of them who died in 2017, and then a map that's showing which are the most dangerous countries for an environmental activist. Of course, again, the data is old because it's in 2017, but you can see, you can also compare the difference from 1 year to the following one. Behind a map like this, there is a table like the one we see before. So you can do a map like that easily with a tool like the one I showed you before. Okay, I will stop here by just giving you this, sharing with you this sentence that we collected as our payoff in FACTA. Science and journalism are the cornerstones of democracy. We see that a strong, strong combination of science, data, and very powerful journalism in promoting democratic values. And I stop here. If there are any questions, thanks, of course, for staying with me up to here. But if there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, really, also for being perfectly on time. So we have around 10 minutes for a first round of questions. I see that you can either raise your hand using the Zoom tool or mute yourself or use the chat as you prefer. So there was Elena commenting before that you're also working in anthropology. You're a researcher, right?
Yes,
so how
I am.
this can help also in your work?
Yes, it helps. It also poses questions. So it's very interesting for a researcher approach. Is both a challenge and an opportunity. So thank you for proposing that.
Thanks, Elena.
We're gonna have all these examples.
Yes.
We're gonna own them, and then we can practice on our own, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Actually, as I said, like you also have a list of tools and tutorials, because I'm very aware that you need at least 3 days to go through one step by step to each one. So what I've compiled is a list of tools and a list of tutorials that you can use. So you can try and practice and see how they work for you.
They're amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Aurora. I'm happy. So I'm actually taking, while other people can come in with the questions, I just would like to take the comment Elise is doing. We look quite safe in the Balkans according to the map. It's a very interesting comment for one reason particularly. It might be absolutely true, and the map is actually showing the data that are available. But it's also possible that we don't have data on the Balkans or on Italy, for example, or on other countries, right? So one question that recently we've been posing ourselves a lot is we use the data that's available, but then there are lots of data who are not available. And in fact, somehow, maybe the most interesting and the challenging thing for journalists is really to try and find those data who are not readily or promptly available, but they might be meaningful, right? Very important. So, and in that sense, Elena, I'm taking your comment also as a, again, as a food for thought, because collecting data or finding data means also somehow to be in the process of producing the data, and that's really not easy at all. But it's extremely important when focusing on certain topics, right?
Yes, I was wondering whether I could involve the project team in an event I'm organizing for my region. I'm also a functionary civil servant from Emilia-Romagna region, as you.
As I
say.
am, where I'm living. Okay, Erin, we live in the same place. Yeah.
So, as you know, the European Maritime Days session of 2022 is in Ravenna.
Yeah.
We are organizing a workshop on how can we put up the structure of a new Mediterranean approach to the ocean literacy.
That's nice.
And this will be mainly focusing about projects we have already ongoing, like the European Life funded project EEL, about eels, life eel.
Yeah.
And this one, the project you talk about, I think this project is also maybe a more environmental focused one, but not so much more focused. And the challenge, the real challenge is to find the right balance between the citizens' interest, the bottom-up interest, and the high-level science-based projecting, managing, and communication. Because I think I strongly believe that communication is part of a policy, of every policy.
Yeah.
And should be based on science and followed by the institutions in a very strong way. So
I agree. There is a comment here. The president, I'm a journalist. I'm impressed. One question about the impact of the stories you produce. How do you measure the impact? And according to you, should we set a hard border between journalism and advocacy? Oh, that's a very good question. So, okay, first of all, how to measure the impact? That's that's the graal we are all discussing at this time, and I think it's very interesting because we have to find the right type of indicators. The traditional indicators we've been embracing in the last 10 years are all metric indicators, and there is a little bit of a hype around metric measurement. For example, number of visualization, number of downloads, number of people who are sharing the same content, and so on and so forth. I have to say I like those indicators up to a point. I'd be much more interested in seeing if a story you do is actually enacting some sort of, for example, local impact, like having people reacting to that, trying to find a solution to that, or applying the solution you're talking about, or as Elena was just mentioning now, bringing that kind of view into a policy suggestion or a policy demand or request. Okay, and I think that it's much more difficult to measure the impact that way. It's very easy to measure the impact in terms of how much of these things are seen, because of course they are digital product, and these digital products are highly measurable, right? In the way you can see how many people stay there, how many people play with the map, or how many people go back to the table and so on. And I can tell you that many newspapers, many media outlets have been commenting on how these kind of product, they even get to call them news applications. So new products that are used in making the news, they are actually extremely popular. People like to go on maps. People like to interact with the graphic and all of that. So we know that for a fact. But I would like to bring impact to a higher point. And impact is something that you should measure in terms of ability to change things, like the state of the art, and make sure that you actually manage to bring some important or interesting information that can give some leverage to the people, to the local community, to actually act. And that would be very interesting. So we're doing lots of workshop only on finding the appropriate indicators, and Julia is smiling because we do that a lot together. The thing is, I don't want to set a hard border between journalism and advocacy. I just want to be very transparent in the way I do things. For example, when I talk about environmental issues, or I talk about the climate crisis, as a journalist, at this point, I am very, very clear to where I stand. And I'm trying to do that. Of course, I'm not an advocate in terms of being part of, for example, of an NGO. I state very clear when I'm doing a job or a work as a reporter, or when I'm doing that as a citizen. Okay. But at the same time, I think it's not a matter of being super objective. In certain type of issues, it's not so much a problem of objectivity. It's a problem of transparency, of honesty, of being very clear to your readers or viewers or listeners to where you stand, and giving them enough contents and understanding for framing your position. I don't believe, particularly now that we're dealing with such complexity, I don't believe that a journalist should try to be super objective, and that's where we end up our job. I do believe that we need to be very, very clear about our sources, about our framing of the story, about the way we treat topics and we treat data, for example, how we analyze the data, the type of expert we involved, and all of that. So giving our readers every ingredient they need to actually understand exactly the type of information we are providing.
Thanks, Eli. We had a question from Chantal.
Yes, I wanted to let my colleagues first. So if there's no time for other questions from them, otherwise I'll ask my question. Yeah.
I think you can go ahead. I mean, we will have more time for questions also in half an hour or so.
So my question is more, well, as I'm a communicator, and we're doing a huge amount of work to also reach out to media. We're doing a huge amount of work to give them stories that start from people. And in the case of coastal wetlands, which is the topic why we are here today, although we somehow luckily have the issue of the sea level rising, so that's going to affect directly people in their daily lives. We also try to talk about basic things like, do you know where the salt that is on your table is coming from? And we try to push for all these stories. We try to talk about how this young guy from Sardinia managed to reduce the consumption of water thanks to the use of drones in agriculture and so on. And still, it's extremely hard to have some pickup. And trust me, we have data behind and everything. So I'm often wondering what's happening. I mean, is there also an issue on the side of time from media, or is it us not having the right approach? I'm really wondering what's going on. Actually, it seems it's harder and harder to put the environmental topics in the media lately.
Actually, I'm under the opposite impression. I think environment is more and more present in the media, but I think there are two issues here, because I can tell you lots of media in the last couple of years have been hiring climate reporters, environmental reporters, or looking for collaborators into that kind of field. So I think there is a higher interest. I mean, until 2 years ago, anytime I was pitching something about climate, even to people who were sensible to the topic, they would all tell me, oh, it's so boring. You only have this dry data. People do not understand how that relates to them. But in the last few years, unfortunately for all of us, it's becoming more and more clear that the crisis is actually touching upon all of our lives. Of course, there are a lot of inequalities and a lot of differences in terms of the impact the crisis is having in different parts of the world. But at the same time, I'll just give you an example. The flooding that hit Germany last year, that was something no one was expecting. And yet, I mean, it hit one of the richest regions in Europe, okay? So in that sense, there is no safe point anywhere. And this is becoming clearer and clearer. So even media are actually catching up a lot. But there are two things. First of all, like if I think of me, I don't want ready stories. I want to find my own stories. So what I need from a communication office is actually the ingredients, if you want. It's telling me where I can find the data, or maybe sometimes giving me contacts or possibility like that. But I don't want to get a ready-made story, because of course that's going to be exactly the same in every other media, because that's the way lots of media work. They just take the communication, the press release or the communication package and make an article out of that. So anytime, for example, FAO shares a report, or even the IPCC the other day, the last report a week ago, you go to every single page and it's all the same. Everyone is writing the same. And I think that's extremely lazy on the side of journalists. Sometimes it's lazy and sometimes it is a matter of time, as you said. Lots of journalists do not have the time or the resources to go in depth into that. But I, as an environmental journalist, I certainly don't want to use that way. So there are two ways that I work well with. First of all is the data given under embargo, exactly as it happens in the scientific community. So I want to have the material in advance, all the different, like the data and the parts that I can actually work on, and then I can craft my own story with my own style and using that kind of material and being still on time. So I see that now that's taking place more and more even in organization, because before they were coming out the same day with a press release with all, but this is more difficult to react in that way. So if
I don't believe in press releases anymore, actually. And
I agree with you.
We're even trying to pitch in exclusivity.
Yeah.
Like lately we've been pitching BBC, The Guardian, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's like they are interested, but they want time. So you're stuck. Sure. Because your story is here and you would like it to be out. And at the same time, it seems like, well, if we've already done it, no, we're not going to do it again. And I think every story is different. So sometimes I feel really stuck. Or maybe it's because I'm talking to two international media and I need to move on to a more local situation.
Well,
I don't know.
Certainly local situations are usually more reactive or more interested, because local stories are extremely important for local communities, right? I also think that the point is also that you need to build a sort of a trusting relationship with journalists in that sense. I mean, I have at this point my own sources in some organizations, and I know that I can trust them if I need data, if I need materials, but it's not so much when they are ready to release something that I want to work on that. It's more when that's fitting the type of work I'm doing, right? So it's a mutual sort of challenge in a way, but I think that building trust is really the key. So having a number of journalists interested in that. And the other point is really on the other side is making sure, and I'm sure it's not a problem you are having, but I can tell you I had this problem many times, that sometimes organizations because they are doing advocacy, they push their point of view and their data a lot. And of course, they work exactly as institution. They're trying to push forward their view of things. And like recently, it happened to me, a biodiversity organization, they sent out this amazing package of material. And when I went to verify that, there were at least 2 data that were absolutely inflated. And that's not the way, you gain my trust, because of course, the minute I discovered that, I think you are not the right source for me, because you're trying to sell a story and you're selling a story. And a lot of other journalists don't do that type of verification. So of course, that story goes out exactly that way on the media, current media. And that's really annoying for me, because that's not doing anyone any good, right? So yeah, there are these kind of issues. I think there is a question. So data journalism is for a rather intellectual public. The challenge is how to explain the problem for a normal public, that is to say, does not have a great intellectual level, how to popularize data journalism for this public. Actually, I don't agree with this. I think data journalism is really a great way to make certain data and certain facts immediately visible to everybody. And of course, it's very important that you pick the right data and you actually use all the tools in a proper way, because sometimes I see visualization were extremely complicated and too pretentious or too artistic. Sometimes we say there is also data porn, in the sense that people in some media try to use data simply to beautify a situation, and that's really not helping. I agree with you completely. But if you pick the right data, and if you are actually extremely open to the way that data is being produced, I think that that is really super powerful. And it's really a matter of being extremely clear to how you treated that data. And that actually connects with this other question. In areas where data is scarce, how to make the story as appealing as it is with data. That's a big point. Of course, lack of data is a story per se. And I can tell you 2 examples. One is the one I was showing you, Sensor Africa. That's a project that's being set up by a very tiny group of coders, 1 coder and a couple of journalists, because there was no data available in that sense on the quality or environmental quality in a number of places. So what they did was to make sure that they involved people. They did a sort of a citizen science project involving people living in communities who were experiencing environmental problems, and giving them a sensor and make sure that they were collecting the data. And by doing that, they actually pushed the local institutions to be more active and start monitoring the situation. It doesn't work all the time, but it's a very powerful way that of using, and I'm making quote unquote, using a local community, involving a local community in the collection of data, to make sure that where official data are not available, you can actually show that the problem is still there. And it's actually also a way that goes back to the previous question. So if people are the first producer of the data, then they are more involved in the data and are more interested in reading the outputs. And so that's a very, very powerful way to also sort of cross-educate journalists and communities about common problems. And the other way to do that, of course, is to show the lack of data, the effect the lack of data is having. For example, a couple of colleagues of ours have done a mapping of a slum outside Lagos in Nigeria. And they did the mapping with the people from this area. It's an informal settling, but it's huge, with lots of people living there. And it wasn't anywhere to be seen. No official maps, no official data on that. So what they did was they started basically taking pictures of the environment, building a map and building the stories and showing that that was a settlement where people were living. And that's a way where you actually are filling with data something that is apparently even not there, because it's neglected by official maps or by official documents. Of course, all of these requires journalists to be extremely proactive and also not work on their own, but to work with local communities and to work with 2 types of other professionals we need: developers, that are extremely important when we are trying to collect data and use data and analyze data, and people who can be quite good in working with tools like graphic tools, like, for example, developing maps or developing visualization that can be good. But a tiny trinity of people, a journalist, a graphic, and a developer can do wonders in data journalism.
Thanks, Eli. Elena was adding in the chat with qualitative inquiries, for instance, only part of the solution, and I think that's complementary of what you were saying, of course.
Absolutely.
So is there any other quick question or comment at this stage? If not, and if you agree, before the coffee break, which unfortunately will be virtual, we will do another, let's say, 20 minutes to go into some of the case studies. So I wanted to show you some of the work we've been doing, actually also with Chantal in the past year. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it? All right. Just a second. Okay, so as I was saying, we go now into the so-called solution journalism. So Elisabetta was introducing this topic, and now I would like to share with you some of the case studies we've been working on. I'll go quickly on myself, as Elisabetta already said what we are doing. We've been working with FACTA and Formica Blue on many projects, both on communication and journalism. And I also work as a journalist for Global Science, which is a media outlet of the Italian Space Agency. So I've been covering the climate crisis from above, let's say, on Earth observation, and so this kind of approach. So when I met Chantal, I was really hit by the wetland angle. I must admit, I didn't know a lot about wetlands, and I didn't have the feeling of how much wetlands are crucial and are important to fight climate change and also to cover climate change. So some of you might recognize this image, some of you from Tunisia. This is Gar El Mel, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, and it's an amazing and unique lagoon. It's about 35 square kilometers, and it's really one of the Tunisia's most precious coastal heritage sites, and it's a great example of wetlands. So of course, as the word says, wetland is wet. We can have inland wetland, and we can have coastal wetlands, is what we are focusing on with Chantal. In general, wetlands are really, really crucial for the Mediterranean, and Chantal will can tell much more about that. But from our perspective of communicators and journalists, we must know that wetlands are really among the most productive ecosystem in the Mediterranean. You can see here the image, so the part that is actually covers the coastal wetland in particular. But at the same time is also one of the most threatened ecosystem by human activities. Elisabetta was mentioning agriculture before. This is one of the main threats to wetlands, but also, you know, tourism and human settlement in general. And the thing also to link with what Chantal was saying before about the difficulty to actually fill the gap and make media talk about wetlands is that there is actually little coverage about that. So we have a lot about climate change, the climate crisis. Of course, the Guardian pledge that Elisabetta was presenting before helped a lot in pushing and making media talk and cover the climate crisis. But wetlands is like the little sister or brother, as you would say, less cover. And I think this is actually an opportunity because there is a gap here, and we have lots of interest stories and also a lot of data. So in wetlands, I think we can find in a way the bridge between data and also stories, and of course is what we need the most. So I want to share with you a solution journalism approach to wetland in particular and to the climate crisis in general. And as Elisabetta was saying before, solution journalism is actually a kind of journalism that focuses on solution rather than problems. I really like this image. Is by a post, an article by Michael Simmons, and I wrote the link here if you're interested. Michael Simmons is a part of the Solution Journalism Network. He was trained at the CUNY University in New York, and he was one of the first journalists who actually started speaking about solution journalism as a model. And he said that solution journalism actually investigates and explains in a clean, critical and clear-eyed way how people try to solve widely shared problems. So the point is actually focusing on solutions. And of course, solution, as you can see here in the image, are less big. Problems are usually screamed while solutions are whispered. So the idea is actually to give more space to this kind of less known approach. And I think it's very relevant when it comes to the climate crisis in general and wetlands in particular. So here, this is a work done actually by the Wetland-based Solution project Chantal is leading. And it's a quick example I wanted to share of how wetland can help to fight the climate crisis. So first of all, Elisabetta was mentioning this before, we see that the climate crisis doesn't affect anymore remote places, the North Pole, the Arctic. So it's something that came to our home, that it's affecting the Mediterranean widely. And coastal wetlands can be really a key to fight the extreme weather problems we are having in the Mediterranean, like droughts or floods. And the Wetland-based Solution project collected a lot of data to show that. So this is just an infographic they realized to show this impact. Another problem that wetlands can help solve, or if not solve, fight, is the sea level rise. So with COP26, we talked about this a lot. So this idea that the sea level is constantly rising. So coastal wetlands are a natural way to fight coastal erosion and so to counteract on this climate crisis. And the third very good example is the storing carbon. So it's really less known. We usually talk about forests and trees, but actually healthy wetlands have really a crucial role in storing carbon, and they actually can store faster. We talk about 10 to 20 times faster than boreal forests, for example. So if conserved and if kept healthy, this kind of environment can really help fight the climate crisis. And this is not very known. So there is really little coverage about this. There is a lot about forests and about also solution journalists that apply and try to save forests, but not as much as coastal wetlands. So just to give you a couple of examples of success stories, I wanted to share with you two case studies we have been working on with Chantal and Patricia as well, that I saw she joined before in the call. So the first one, we all know it, is the COP26 and of course this compromise that the feeling that we had that actually there weren't so many action and journalism, to recall the advocacy part, were actually pushing quite a lot the idea that the developing countries weren't doing enough to keep the 1.5 degree alive, as this image says. So with Chantal, we found that this could actually be an angle to talk about wetlands because wetland was actually a big missing ingredient. So there wasn't any official panel about wetlands. There were some lateral events talking about wetlands and coastal wetlands in particular, but wetlands are never mentioned in the COP26 results. And we found that this was a news per se. So the idea that wetlands was the missing ingredient of COP26. So with Chantal and with FACTA in general, we try to apply this method, this reverse approach, let's say. So we didn't start from the news. The news was this one, that COP26 didn't involve wetlands. But then we tried to go to the literature, and so to find a solid base of data and of scientific papers that actually that actually could sustain the thesis that coastal wetlands were crucial. And so this is one of the main sources we use, and of course I will share everything at the end. So we find this data, and we talk with several scientists of the Wetland-based Solution project. And actually, the result was that the starting point is that climate change in the Med is 20% more intense than in the rest of the world. So the Mediterranean is a crucial hotspot for the climate crisis. And this is this was the starting point. And then what I was mentioning before, that the Med is also quite threatened by the activity. So 43% of the population in the Med is actually suffering from, for example, water shortage. So there is a crisis and something to be addressed here. And this was a map that developed one of the researchers from the Wetland-based Solution project, elaborate from the data, and the source is linked here. And this is an immediate visualization of the problem. So the fact that the Mediterranean is a climate change hotspot. So here, where you see the red dots, you see all the points and the hotspot where that are the climate change hotspot in the Med, and the part in blue are where the coastal wetlands are based. So here you can basically see a good example of correlation of climate hotspot and coastal wetlands that show how much these places are crucial. And so to intervene on coastal wetlands can actually help to fight climate change. So we go to the solution. And first of all, as I was mentioning before, the idea that wetlands are actually among the world's most significant carbon sinks. So if protecting this area over here, we can actually help reverse the carbon emissions. Because wetlands actually can store more than more carbon than the forests. So the data is about 40% of the whole world's carbon, which is really a lot. And the time, as I was mentioning, it's 10 to 20 times higher than forests. So the idea is actually to present wetlands as a possible global solutions for the Mediterranean to fight climate change. And of course, this was also in the light of the next COP, so COP27 in Egypt. So to give the idea that it was a missing ingredient now, but can become something that we actually help take in consideration for the next COP. And of course, the idea here is to go from the global approach to the local stories, which is actually what we would like to do together in the next 1 hour and a half, more or less. Because of course it's crucial, as Elisabetta was mentioning, to present the global problem. And so to embed a solution journalism approach that actually can helps fix, let's say, global problems. But I think that the most effective part is actually when you focus on your area, so on local stories. So for example, here there is a great picture of the Salina in Montenegro, and the idea that the salt is actually coming from here for the zone can really give the idea of how this area is crucial for the people that are living there. So the idea, my invitation is always to try to link the big picture to your local stories, and we will try to do a bit together later. Another super nice story I wanted to share with you is the one that Chantal was quickly mentioning before, and is a story happening in Oristano, which is a small town in Sardinia in Italy. And this was the opposite. So while before we started from the big picture, trying to go to the local story, here we start from a very, very local stories. And while before we had tons of data available to prove the fact that coastal wetlands were really crucial, here we didn't have so many data. So we actually, the project and in general, the journalists covering this have to collect the data in a while and also to elaborate them. So this guy here, he's called Andrea Liverani and is 24, I think now 25-year-old entrepreneur for Oristano. And he's also a drone pilot. So he actually brought this passion of drones to his work, and he proposed this solution to actually create a project of smart agriculture. So the environment, the Gulf of Oristano is this very big area, and it's a very crucial area. It's a Ramsar site, and it takes along 200 kilometers of coastline. So it's very crucial, and almost all the agriculture of the area is happening there. But the problem here was that in the area, there is periods of very high drought, alternate by a period of extremely rainy periods. So it was really difficult to find an efficient agricultural systems. So the solution here was to develop a precision agriculture project based on this drone technology. And they collected data for over a year. And in the end, this data, so we didn't have data available before, but after collecting data for a year, the result was that this kind of irrigation based on drone collected data actually led to 30% water saving. So it was really a great result. And it was an effective example of how a solution approach can be used to solve at least a local problem. So the idea is actually to cover this, of course, from a journalistic perspective. So not to, try to compare, for example, the data in other regions, but the interesting fact here is that the data weren't already here before. And so the idea is that the solution journalism can be part of the process of actually solving the problem, at least the local problems. So just to conclude, there are a couple of quick examples I wanted to share, just it's about different areas, but just to show you how wetlands can also be associated to really practical solution. This is an article of I think a couple of years ago from The Guardian, and it's about a study in Australia. So not Mediterranean, but just to show you that here it's also an area with wetlands, and preserving this kind of tropical wetlands could help save thousands of lives, as the title reads, and 600 billion each year. So this was an hypothesis from the study, and The Guardian followed this idea that actually preserving wetland could also have an economic impact. Another example that I really love is this podcast. It's called 99% Invisible, and it's a podcast created by Roman Mars, who is an American radio producer, and it actually covers less known places in general, so also from a perspective of architecture, for example. And they decided to dedicate one episode to wetlands. It's called For the Love of Peat, and I put the link here. I really invite you to listen to this, also because it's really a masterpiece of sound and of story construction. And the story is this wetland in Scotland that was really threatened by an eco environment action that actually wanted to plant trees in that area. So it was a good, let's say, action to fight climate change, but it came out to be the wrong trees. And so this threatened the whole ecosystem of wetlands. And so it took really, really a lot of years to restore the situation. And the podcast is really well developed. So just to conclude, these are some useful sources that we used to develop these and other stories. And of course, if you're interested, we can share with you all of them later. And so here you can find a lot of data that can be useful, and it's in a way complementary to what Elisabetta was showing you before. So it's not raw data, it's data already elaborated. You can find visualization in some case, but it's also, you know, a useful way to start digging into this kind of topic, and also to cover coastal wetlands and wetlands in general. So my last advice, and is how I would continue and then start the second part, which will be more practical, is actually to find your story. So keep an eye on the general context, as we were suggesting, but then try to find your story and to cover the climate crisis, and in this case, for example, wetlands, starting from where you live, where you work. So the idea to actually try to find your angle and to engage the community you live with. And this is partially also answer to one of the comments that were raised before. So the idea that when data are not enough, local community can actually be a source of data or a source of stories that in the end is what we really look for as a journalist and communicator. So thanks. I'll stop here for now. And I think I stopped sharing. So do you have any quick questions or comments before the coffee break? Or did I kill you with all this? I mean, it's been 1.5 hours already. So maybe if you want to have a coffee before, and then we can, yes, I see people. So we need coffee. So I see we take 15 minutes. Is it okay? So we are perfect. So we are back at 4:45 sharp. And then we start also the practical part, and I hope the discussion. Thank you.